Belonging without losing standards. Friendships means connection, solidarity, and shared humanity. Teams can compete hard and still build respectful bonds. At the end of a basketball game, you leave everything on the court, is what we say. Nothing falls outside the court. You don't have grudges. You don't have negative emotions associated with the game. Okay, beautiful. Um, yeah, thank you so much, John, for this opportunity. Um, just to kind of give you guys a little introduction for myself. So I was at the National Olympic Committee of Kenya for just around 4 months. I come from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I am currently just finishing up my bachelor's with physical literacy, minor in psychology, and I'm going to be pursuing sports psychology on a further level. Myself, I am an athlete. I've done many, many sports. I just finished my first uh, or my third full marathon. I did high rocks, two of them in Kenya while I was out there. I did Mount Kenya. I did Kilimanjaro. Um, at the highest level, I played basketball, and out of those, I've done extensive research on knee injuries and just the resiliency that comes with refixing our minds to align with our bodies. So I'll be just speaking a little bit about like what it takes for us to get to that same level where we left before we might have gotten injured or the resiliency that comes with just sport in general. Let's start here. Okay, there we go. Firstly, I wanted to frame with that um, I know there's a lot of amazing, very well experienced coaches that know a lot more than myself and have really been the pinnacle in sports in many, 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 many years before I've come and have a lot of experience. So I'm going to frame this session as adding tools to already developing coaches' arsenal, not telling them how to code per se, but more so integrating more experience to help them be more efficient or effective with their coaching styles. So this theme is simple. Train the person first, not the sport itself. And the goal is not to have perfect athletes. The goal is to have healthier people who can grow, who can perform, and can thrive at an elite level. So who are you if your sport is taken away tomorrow? Now, this question is so important because as coaches, as athletes, as people, we fail to recognize that you're human first. You have your identity outside of basketball. I am Belvir. Who am I? What do I do? And to differentiate yourself from that sport is something a lot of coaches and athletes fail to do early on because they have really immersed themselves into their sport and it becomes something that their life revolves around. And for myself, through all the experience that I've gotten so far, has truly been exceptional in the sense of understanding that if a kid early on can recognize that a sport adds to them and isn't all of them, it can truly allow their confidence to grow. It can allow their identity to grow because if that sport in some tragic accident, an injury, or simply because the sport has run its course in their lifetime and they now aren't able to go to a higher level, what are they going to do? They don't really have an answer for that. And it can cause a lot of anxiety. It can cause, in some cases, depression when something so important from you has been taken away. And to really help them build of who am I outside of the sport is an important question that more coaches and athletes need to ask themselves early on in their athletic careers. So where are we going to be going today? Um, Number one, first person. Sport as a development tool, not only as a performance system. Two, identity. How athletes benefit from sport identity without becoming trapped by it, as I'd mentioned. Three, burnout. If you're doing your sport for so long, you forget that there needs to be a spark that needs to be sustained as well. And that spark needs to happen through a sustainable environment, your support systems, who helps you, who coaches you, who gives you diet, your parents, all these things are very, very helpful in your ability to be successful. Number four, mental health. Recognizing that athletes are, like as I mentioned, humans before their performance. Number five, injury and resilience. Supporting these athletes when their body and confidence are rebuilding, if they've come back from a certain injury, if they've come back from some time off because of personal reasons, mental health reasons. It could be a variety of things. And number six, action tools. Simple practices that coaches, athletes, and administrators can start using today to allow their athletes to be more successful in their craft. Okay. Sport can be a training ground for life. A lot of us might have, hear something like this and not really understand what it can be to differentiate for life, because for us day-to-day life is very different than someone coming in and comparing that to elite sports, because there's different regimens, there's different diets, there's different training, there's different waking up schedules. We're a lot more scheduled, and the way that a lot of individuals see athletes is completely defined by discipline, by repeated challenges, having through habits and preparation, and the connections formed are through the purpose. And resilience is built through exactly that, setbacks, injuries. When someone gives you criticism that can help you effectively grow, and ultimately rehabilitation and recovery, because all athletes will go through some type of injury to some extent. And how can that be implemented? How can their skills to overcome be incorporated into our day-to-day lives? That's what we need to be looking at. Another thing that I wanted to touch on personally, because it was one of the main things that we had focused on while I was there at NOC, is Olympic values. And they're not just posters, they're practices. Um, Excellence, pursue growth, not perfection. Respect, protecting dignity, safety, and fair play, and friendship, building connection and community across differences, and lastly, balanced development, body and mind together, because it's all about, in the end, how has this sport allowed you to be successful as a person, not so much your individual statistics, but also how did you help build a community? What impact did you have? Did you inspire the, youth? Did you have a positive, long-lasting impact? Because for myself personally, what I saw while I was in Kenya was a lot of athletes that having such amazing national pride with everything they did. They wore their colors with such pride, and the 254, it was something that they held with honor. And it's the same way that we wear our jerseys, our pride, our numbers, our names, and it needs to be treated just as that, right? Not something that just kind of comes and goes. It's something that'll last. It's the legacy that we leave behind with our sports. So athletes may forget the drill, they remember the environment. What that kind of means is that if an athlete, um, let's say for example, trained for basketball, they would do a certain 3v3 drill, or they would do a certain dribbling drill or rebounding drill, but they remember how it made them feel. They remember the team. They remember the coaches, the staff, the support they got around it. They remember all those things. Me personally, I don't per se remember exactly how to do drills from my university. That, well, was what, 5 years ago now. But I remember the athletes. I remember my teammates. I remember how they had made me feel. And the words that you share with your athletes become your athlete's inner voice. And the trust that you build with them determines whether feedback is received or resisted. And by that, I mean, if coaches are yelling at you and telling you that you're useless and you're not doing well, you're not performing the way that they want, that's going to affect your self-confidence. You could have trained something 50 times and be exceptionally good at it, but when push comes to shove and it's time to perform, you could deteriorate. You can crumble under pressure simply because that self-confidence has been shattered to some extent and it's shaky. And from a young athletic perspective, it's so detrimental. And we think as you get older, it's your responsibility, but it's truly a team effort. And it's the environment that's shaped for you to succeed and be prosperous. And belonging and having influences, motivation, long-term participation in whichever sport you are. And ultimately, it's leadership. Where does it start from? And the coach can protect both performance and personhood. Protect your mental health to some extent of creating a space. If you feel like a team is not meshing well, if they don't have the best chemistry, how are you going to build that? How are you going to address that? All those factors are so important to help the cohesion. And team cohesion is exceptionally important, like a sport like rugby. If you
Mhm.
can't trust,
Birlikte. Aa,
uh, sorry, I think we had a little bit of a unmute situation there. But if you can't trust your teammates to have your back in a certain play or a certain, let's say, play drawn up for your coach to score, a point, uh, it leaves a lot of place for distrust and even in some case resentment. So as I mentioned this earlier, is train the person first, then develop the performer. And a lot of us don't per se have explain of like that performer is ignored in this model. Performance is supported by stronger foundations. So the athlete is not only muscles, tactics, uh, results, they also carry identity, motivation, family, culture, stress, fear, and hope. And the science of motivation helps coaching support this foundation because when you have as these, certain pillars, the mind, the body, identity, belonging, purpose, it adds to the athlete as a whole. Because performance grows from a more complete human foundation. You got to lay down exactly what it means to be a successful candidate in any of your sports. If, let's say, for example, Kipchoge's team, if he doesn't lead by a certain mindset and perspective, he's going to have a rippling effect for his whole team. He's going to have an effect that could be either negative if he performs in a certain capacity, if he wakes up at a certain time, if he neglects his diet, if he doesn't address that, he's having certain issues with his interpersonal life, with his family, that can have a rippling effect on his whole camp, possibly. Right? So we need to understand that when we hold a certain amount of power and influence, everybody we talk to, everyone even anyone who's watching us will have a direct effect that can be either negative or positive. And all of this needs to start for us forming a complete human rather than the actual athletic performer. So three psychological needs that support motivation. So motivation is a extremely well researched topic in sports psychology. The first one is autonomy. So autonomy would be more so introduced in the self-determination theory. So that would mean without overlooking the audience, that you need to understand, what does this athlete feel? Do they have a voice? Do they have ownership? Do they have a meaningful choice in their sport? Do they feel like they have control over themselves? Or do they feel like they're being pushed in a route that they're not very happy with, they're not very supported in, and it can lead to a lot of resentment, it can lead to a lot of negative emotions associated, and ultimately it will lead to an end that they per se might not even have wanted. Second would be competence. Athletes feel capable because progress is visible and feedback is clear. Ryan and Desi describe just as autonomy, competence, and relatedness as basic psychological needs tied to intrinsic motivation and well-being. So this is something that's taught to athletes very early on. There's intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is something that you personally enjoy doing. You find happiness within your sport. If I go and run a race and I don't finish first, but I beat my best time by 10 minutes, I'm motivated. I'm happy that I've excelled, that I've done better, I've beaten my record. Versus extrinsic motivation would be, I get a medal. You can't always be the best because there always will be someone that's faster, stronger, better at that sport sooner or later. Records are made to be broken. And those extrinsic motivations can fizzle out. It can only take you so far in life. And, a lot of kids, unfortunately, at a young age are taught that extrinsic motivations are important and they are well equipped because it allows for kids to feel good. It's that burst, it's that dopamine rush when you stand on a podium, when you get handed a medal, when you get, introduced in front of everybody that congratulations to so and so, they've gotten first out of the whole meet. And when they go to the next stage, maybe they don't get that recognition. And that deteriorates their confidence, their ability to feel like they're good enough. And when someone actualizes and connects their self-worth and their ability to perform and happiness to a sport, it can very quickly lead to someone feeling connected, respected, and part of something bigger or not. If you don't feel that you belong, you will sooner or later want to eliminate yourself from that environment. And a lot of kids, unfortunately, as I mentioned, young athletes have went through this where they've been pushed a certain path their whole life without even getting the recognition of understanding of what do they want, what makes them happy. And when they reach a certain early adulthood phase, they will quit their sport and they'll take a completely different approach. And that happiness that they might have gotten one point in life is unfortunately no longer there. They aren't able to play at a level or train at a level that brings them happiness because they no longer had that motivation from an intrinsic point of view. To wrap all that up is to basically say, ensure you're happy with your sport because sooner or later, if you're not just happy and you're only searching for the accolades, it will lead to a lot of negative in emotions attached when you aren't able to achieve those. Because we are human. We only have so much time on this world, and sport for a lot of us isn't everything. We have family, we have friend, we have identity outside of that sport. And it's very important to acknowledge that. Ownership is the next thing I'll be talking about is what keeps athletes engaged. This is something that I personally have implemented within my young athletes while playing basketball is asking athletes to help set the goals that actually align with them as people. You can offer them choices, and choices are safe and appropriate, of course, and explain the why. The why is so important. When we do anything in life, our why can differentiate whether it's important or if it's superficial for someone else. And behind that is the training demands, using accountability without removing dignity. If you ask me, why do I want to become the first person to summit Mount Kilimanjaro? You know, that would be because let's say my why could be that I personally have seen my family from generations try, and I feel like this would be something that can make them proud. That's a somewhat strong why. I would recognize that as something that has a meaning, it has depth, versus saying, "Oh, I want to be the first one because I want to get the views, I want to have a world record, and I just want to be the best, and I want people to see me as the best." That can be deemed as, to some extent, just by searching for those accolades, that recognition from social media, from people, and that can only take you so far in the sense of if your why isn't strong enough to push you through the downs, it won't allow you to push yourself forward. If I continue believing that my ability to succeed is based off of just what others see me as, sooner or later that will fizzle off and that will lead to some sort of burnout. Next one. The next one is confidence. And confidence grows when progress is visible. Break skills into reachable steps. By that I mean is you're gonna have some kids better and being able to understand certain models of a training block better than others, and some kids will catch up other training models, and that's unfortunately just how it works. I myself, I was more of a shooter and not the best post player, but I'm 6'6", so I was always put down in the post, and I was always put in a place that they felt was better for me than actually understanding and seeing where my skills were. And that led to a lot of issues and resentment with the team because I was always trying to play a spot in the team that I believe I was good at, which I did train for, that I personally dedicated hours and hours of my time to, versus, the team and the coaches believing that I'm a larger person on the court, so I should automatically be put into the post in basketball. And, for myself, I knew that I didn't get the clarity. I didn't get the understanding of why the coaches had made that decision without consulting me. And that unfortunately led to a lot of reduction in my confidence. It My effort was slowly going down and I didn't want to learn. I was inconsistent, and this unfortunately led to a lot of disparity within the team's cohesion and our ability to synergize and work together. And what you want to do is you want to build success experience before increasing pressure. And the only way that you can do that is by listening and by talking, communicating. And communication styles is so important. Knowing that the athletes are more likely to work through difficulty when they feel they matter. As I mentioned, relatedness is something that everybody wants to feel to some extent. It's impactful, it's reassuring, it's ultimately helpful for us to grow as people. And when athletic identity means that, seeing that role for an individual, it helps that confidence grow to an extent that can be not so much trackable, but you can see it, you're conscious about it. Belonging is the next one I want to talk about, and this is directly with relatedness. It's a performance resource. Know the athlete beyond the jersey. And I had touched on this earlier. I had mentioned that, you know, an athlete on the court could be seen as a point guard, a shooting guard, a post player. But who are they off the court? Are they a leader? Are they someone that delegates responsibilities? Are they someone that takes responsibility for themselves at home, maybe? Are they the oldest child? Are they the youngest? Are they struggling in academics? All these things make them them. They need to have creative arts outside of just that sport. Making the team standards clear and human and understandable. It helps protect athletes from shame-based culture, creates connection across age, gender, role, and ability. And this is what allows you to see. Boer Van Belt and Linder introduced athletic identity as the degree to which someone identifies with their athletic role. And they mentioned, like something like basketball, identity can give pride and purpose, but when performance drops or injury happens, a narrow identity can create a crisis. And that's something that can be. Agnes, do you mind muting, please?
Yeah.
Could you please mute?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, it was just some background noise there. Okay, I had put in a quick chat reflection, and I will play it by ear, see how we go. If not, we can come back to this at the end. But I wanted to just say, well, what keeps athletes coming back when winning is not guaranteed? If our, let's say, we have our runners doing marathon training, they're training, 2 times a day, and they're focusing on their diet, they're focused on their recovery, their rehabilitation, and they're running, let's say, for 4 years, and they haven't gotten to the results. What makes them come back? When they know that winning is not guaranteed, that they know that there's setbacks in place, what allows them to come back? Right? And I'm not sure how to view the actual comment section. So I will move forward, and we can possibly reconvene about that later in the seminar. Sport identity can be strength and vulnerability. And I spoke about this a little earlier. Um, Athletic identity means seeing the athlete's role as central to who you are. It can support commitment, discipline, and belonging, but it can also become risky when sports become the only resource of self-worth. The goal is not less identity, the goal is wider identity, to surpass them as athletes on the court, to allow them to understand who are they off the court, because all of that ultimately adds to them as a person, because being an athlete is part of you as a person. Being a mother is you as a person. It's not the only thing you are, right? You had dreams at one point, you had aspirations, You can have a lot of things that we might push to the side, but it's still a part of us, our identity. When we were younger, when we were kids, we might have had certain goals in life that we had maybe pushed aside because we understood that our current circumstances weren't feasible for us to attain them, and we never came back to them. We might have liked drawing, we might have liked certain creative spaces that we no longer had time for, and as a result, we focused majority of our time to a certain degree, a certain sport, a certain space, a certain work even, right? And that can really help uh, a person understand that if they can get to a place that allows them to be separated from their sport, when the things in the sport aren't going to the way that they want, they can come back to them as people, have different coping mechanisms. They can go and just read for an hour and relax, breathe, and take a step back. And that can be monumentally helpful when you are going through a block that might not be necessarily the best, or you might be trying and trying and you're not getting the results you want. And that's unfortunately a reality of sport. Athletic identity and what it can give an athlete. Number one, we had talked about commitment. A strong identity can help athletes stay consistent with training, belonging. A team can become a meaningful community. It can be your family away from family. Purpose. Sport gives structure and direction during development. Pride. Athletes can build confidence through effort and growth. Resilience. Setbacks can become part of an athlete's story. And this was with pretty much any injury. If they've had a family member that passed away and they had any sort of adversity in life that had not allowed them to stay on that consistent route for their training block or their athletic journeys. And lastly, leadership. Athletes learn responsibility to self and others through leadership opportunities. If that can mean dedicating a certain individual or certain athlete in a more extensive role that allows them to display their leadership. How can you know if you're good at something unless you're given the opportunity to prove it? When identity narrows, the danger is not loving sport, the danger is becoming only sport. And I had spoken about this a little bit about how when injury can feel like losing the self, when you are no longer able to perform at the level that everyone has expected you as you've expected yourself to, the deselection can feel like a personal rejection. Retirement in some cases for athletes can feel like emptiness, performance slumps, and can have related feelings like worthlessness. And this is sensitive for athletes. It's not something that's talked about enough, in my opinion, making the distinction of sport can be deeply meaningful and part of identity, but it cannot be the only pillar holding a person up. And the question I ask is how can coaches help athletes widen identity while still pursuing excellence? Right? Because if you have a certain player that has the most prominent and common injury for sports like basketball and is like ACL. You have some type of injury with the knee. You have an ACL sprain. For myself, I had ACL, MCL, and a meniscus. All three of them. I had the triple threat, and it was it was awful for myself. And my experience was unfortunately very neglected just because the situation had co-aligned with COVID-19. and the world was already in panic and they didn't know what was going to happen next. And for me personally, I unfortunately didn't have the support that I needed to recover and rehabilitate and come back to the sport. And as a result, I ultimately had stepped away from that elite level and decided to pursue myself on a more deep and meaningful level. And when you have yourself go into certain forms, let's say like uh, coming out of rehabilitation, you have ACL surgery, you're not out for just a couple of days or weeks. It can be months, if not years, and you might never be the same ever again. You might come back after an injury and you will never be able to perform at the level that you left at. And for some athletes, that's unfortunately the reality. But how can you differentiate between who you were and who you are? To accept that is not easy. It's not something that just anybody can do. It takes a lot of patience, support, and ultimately resilience. And as athletes, we're taught to push through. No pain, no gain. That's what they say, right? If you can't go through your struggles, you might not be strong, as they say. And for myself, it's been a fairly up and down roller coaster with conversations that surround something like that because I used to be that way. I used to say that, I'm not having the best time at home. I'm struggling with certain relationships within family or friends, and I push them aside. It's not important. For my ability to push through was what shows that I'm strong. And that's unfortunately not the case. Research has showed that when you address people in an empathetic manner, it truly allows them to feel cared for and allows them to open up and perform at a higher level. And I don't mean like babying your athletes or treating them as, they're small, hurt little, feeble kids or anything like that. I mean being empathetic, and that word empathy is truly under recognized a lot of places on sports, and it's neglected to some extent. Where shown if you're injured, you're on the bench, and that's it. You know, get better, and when you're better, let us know. And of course, they have coaching staffs that support them in that sense, but they don't feel part of the team. Have you seen those? A lot of players, even on an elite level, they have been an amazing addition to the team all season, and then an injury unfortunately sets them back, and they have to sit on the bench. They have to sit on the sidelines, and some of them crumble. Some of them sit there. They look angry. They look miserable. They look like they're forced to be there. They don't want to be there. And some of them excel. Some of them show leadership. They take their circumstance and their situation, and they make it work for them. They say, I can't perform the best physically on the court, but I will still support my team. I'll still ensure that this isn't the only impact is when I'm on the team, but it's also when I'm off the court. And it can truly be an amazing experience to be part of a team that supports each other, regardless of whether you're injured or you're, fully healthy. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's about cohesion. It's about feeling like you belong. Practical tools. Now, this comes a little bit more directly specific with building like a wider identity wheel, is what I call it. And it's more than one role. You can have an athlete, a student, a friend, family, leader, community, values, and future self. Now, all of these can be applied to majority of individuals. And, even that definition of what an athlete is. There's elite athletes that get paid as by profession, and then there's athletes. If you run, even a couple times a week, or you go play basketball, or you play soccer, or football, or rugby, you are an athlete. You're practicing athletics to some extent, and you are an athlete. And for us, it's sometimes with mainstream media, we are comparing ourselves to certain people online, and that can really affect our definition of what an athlete really is. For myself, basketball, like I'd mentioned, was the highest sport that I'd played personally. And I want to use, using certain people use basketball to discuss identity, belonging, and pressure. For myself, connecting, knee injury to fear of losing the athlete role I'd, you know, given myself for so many years. And I want to share a little bit about what that sport gave me and what it forced me to confront. So for myself, playing basketball was something I picked up in grade four, and I went through a lot of struggles socially. I didn't get along with kids my age. I had a different niche within just life. I was more passionate. I had more um, respect for athletics than a lot of kids my age did early on, and it led to a lot of conflict. And when I had been training for so many years, I remember in high school, before tryouts even started, I went up to get a rebound and I had landed on another student's foot, and instantly I was out. And I didn't even get to try out. It was before tryouts even began. And at a young age, I was completely shattered. I had no idea. I had no um ability to perceive what was the next step. I simply felt lost, failed, just absolutely distraught with my current situation. And, I was only 14 years old here. And at a young age, for me, this fear of losing the athlete role was everything to me because I didn't know how to differentiate who I was from who I allowed myself to be in certain circumstances and environments. And for me, I decided that I wanted to be more. And I remember coming back next year and I played senior level basketball for my last 2 years before I went on to university. And it really taught me that, in that one year when I wasn't even on the court, I was in the bleachers watching my teammates and my fellow athletes play. It humbled me, but it also gave me a lot of gratitude to understand that it's a privilege. It's a privilege to be able to put yourself in a sport, to put yourself in a situation that you have the ability to perform. Not everybody has that privilege. And I want to bring back that same conversation. I want you guys to think about when athletes carry more than performance. What does that really mean? Because I mentioned earlier, my research interests were within injury and athlete management, the impact, especially knee injuries, specifically with basketball. To have, you know, athletes come into sport without really recognizing the outcome. They don't know where they might end up. They might not go where they want. And having something like an injury can be not just a small setback, but a major setback can make them spiral. That can make them go into influxed emotional state that can lead to a lot of breakdown within their emotional capacity. And they haven't built up that emotional capacity to deal with something like that. And it makes them, unfortunately, get into a state that isn't the healthiest. Athlete transitions. Every athlete faces ends, whether planned or forced, as mentioned, moving teams or age groups, returning from injury, being cut or not being selected, retirement or career changes, balance with sport, with school, work, family, culture. You might have a kid, you might get married, you have to move countries, your financial capacity might be different. And the athlete journey is developmental. Sport careers involves changes at athletics, psychologically, physiologically, academics, financial, as I mentioned, and sometimes even legal levels in holistic careers for athletes. And the practical point is transition preparations should begin before the crisis, happens. It's, for example, during a marathon, if you've already hit, certain fatigue or your glycogen storages have depleted and you're now facing, exhaustion and you're cramping and your legs don't move, you've already went too far. You should have taken precautions before you got there. But the only way you would have known is by education, is by talking about having conversations surrounding things that would be helpful for you to get to that point where it would be beneficial for you to, let's say, take gels, to take, the meal prior to the marathon or the run at a higher sodium level, higher carb level, right? That will allow you to get to a point to succeed, not when you are there, but before, building up those skills before. And my next transition is going to be for um, youth development. And, for us, when we think about youth development, um, a lot of us think that, you need to put your kids in sport. That one sport that you want them to succeed in is the best way. And it's shown that it's not automatically the safest path. Research links higher degree of specialization with higher risk of overuse injury. For example, if you play a field event. So I did shot put in high school and I went to provincial, and it was for myself, I had really bad tennis elbow, and it was like constant motion of pushing, and that led to a lot of overuse injury. And a lot of parents, they want to have their kids be successful in that sport, so why not put them in that same sport, right? That makes sense to a lot of people, but unfortunately that's not the way that it faces out in reality. Specialization can also be associated with burnout concerns. Sport sampling can support varied movement skills and enjoyment. And the goal is long-term development, not early pressure and burnout. When you have kids that are playing, let's say, rugby, football, and track, it gives them different arsenals in different sports. When you play rugby, there's a completely different skill set that are associated with that sport versus football, right? There's different agility, different tactical skills, there's different even team cohesion. Everything is different. One's more physical, one's a little bit more skill based, right? And you give them the opportunity to choose. Because as soon as you put them into a bubble and they don't want to be in that bubble, that will lead to burnout. That will lead to not being happy with that sport. And with some parents, it can be a way to live out their own dreams that they might have wanted as a young kid through their kids. And that can lead to a lot of resentment and issues within your relationships with your family and your kids, even. And I want to say this carefully. Not every specialized athlete is harmed, and not every multi-sport athlete is protected. It goes both ways. Research generally warns that high volume and year-round single sport training and reduced recovery can increase the risk, but there obviously are outliers. There can be different sports that kids have been maybe put in from a young age, and they've been phenomenal. They could be world-class athletes. And I'm not trying to generalize any single sport or any single coaching style. It's more so a broader example to show that for coaches, development systems should protect joy, recovery, and movement variety, especially when we're talking about our youth. Sampling is not a lack of commitment, it can be development. So I had mentioned, having multi-sport athletes from a young age can develop different movement patterns. Variation can reduce repetitive physical and psychological loads. Athletes may discover what they actually love, and choice supports autonomy and long-term motivation. And I had spoke about this earlier of if you're doing something that you don't really want to do, as a kid, you will continue doing it if your parents have pushed you, but then later on, you will feel a certain level of resentment, possibly, um, a lot of negative emotions associated with the sport because you don't actually want to play it. It's not something that gives you intrinsic motivation. It's more of an extrinsic motivation. My mom is proud of me, so I'll continue playing this sport, but until how long? And this links to the early idea that kids should be allowed to explore 2 or 3 different sports when appropriate. And I want to emphasize that parental pressure and coach pressure can allow these young athletes, they need guidance. They don't need identity foreclosure. They don't need to be told who they need to be. They need to be given options. They need to be given choices to decide for themselves. And when pressure replaces joy, burnout becomes a risk. And the toll emotionally and physically exhaustion wise can be huge. And that'll just be a next transition into burnout. What is burnout? Burnout is more than just being tired. When you don't get enough rest at night, that's not per se burnout. It's repeated, constant pressure in a certain area of your life. Um, Emotional and physical exhaustion, reduced sense of accomplishment, and that can be tied to intrinsic motivation. Sport devaluation, I do not care anymore. I just simply don't want to train. It doesn't bring me any joy. Often develops when demands exceed recovery and meaning. Meaning, people want you to drive your car, but you don't have any fuel. That will lead to burnout. Reddick and Smith's define athlete burnout model, and this includes the emotional and physical exhaustion, reduced accomplishment, and sport evaluation, as mentioned. And I kind of want to revisit normal fatigue and persistent loss of meaning can be seen as something that's different to understand, right? Like just a kid coming to sport and they're tired because they didn't sleep enough versus a kid getting enough rest, eating enough, but coming to a sport and not feeling happy and not wanting to be there because they no longer find joy with that sport. That's a completely different concept. And it can take away from not just the sport for the kid for that temporary time, but forever. They might forever have a certain emotional tide connected with that sport. And for coaches, what burnout signs we might have seen earlier before athletes quit might just be normal. It might just be showing up a little later. It might just be, you know, coming to practice unprepared, maybe neglecting training, maybe neglecting having that time with their teammates, starting to pull back, isolating themselves. And, you know, coaches may notice certain things like mood shifts, attendance change, body signs, motivation drops. As mentioned, they say, I don't care, what's the point? Performance fears, avoiding risks, fear mistakes, and panic before competitions. They might put themselves in a situation to only have places in that they know that they can just get along with just being putting in neutral, just putting in cruise mode. They can just do the bare minimum and get by. They don't want to exceed anyone's expectations. And lastly, social withdrawal. As I mentioned, isolating from the team, isolating from their coaches, and all these things can be detrimental if left unchecked. I'd mentioned if someone's not coming to practices and they're saying that they have a lot of social uh, pressures from their family or their, friends system, something's happened, this should be a red flag. And just having one or two is one thing, but having constant and repetitive mood shifts, if they've gotten into a lot of fights with their teammates, you need to address it. But when something like this happens, let's say uh, one of your athletes are late, or one of their athletes aren't having the performance that you know that they're capable of performing, you get mad at them. You can even get angry at them, right? And for us, we see it as not putting in the 100% effort. But like I'd mentioned, when you're expected to drive a certain distance, when you have no fuel in the car, how can you get there? How can you continue pushing forward when you have no willpower to do so? And that word that I mentioned earlier, empathy, rather than expectation, can be monumentally helpful here. When coaches try to understand why they're doing something versus what they're doing, it's the model of what you've done isn't okay, but I want to understand why. Because that's not who they are. They haven't always been that way. It's just something has led to this shift. And coaches need to be empathetic and understanding and giving them the space and support to explain. Maybe they had a death within the family. Maybe they had a lot of negative thoughts lately, and that's led to a lot of self-resentment. They might even not want to play the sport anymore. They might have lost that ability to continue. All these things can be notable when you're talking about burnout and looking at the warning signs. So keeping the spark alive. Now, this is passion needs protection, not constant pressure. I talked about, build recovery into the culture, celebrate process, not only outcome. Let athletes feel progress and belonging. Keep play, creativity, and joy inside training. Check the athlete before correcting the athlete. And I think that last line, it speaks for the whole side itself, is check on your players rather than discipline for them what they're doing. Understand what's happened along the way, because for us as leaders in sport, we understand that we have a certain ability and certain role to play in a lot of people's perspective. And if we're going to be professionals within the space, we need to understand that there is always a certain level of compassion that needs to be addressed with everything we do. And sometimes you need to be a little bit more stern, but that doesn't mean that you have to pick one or the other. You can check on your athletes before correcting them, but it doesn't mean you have to only do one or the other. It can work in unison. It's just a matter of which one you do first. Mental health. And this is something that isn't addressed, I believe, enough. As someone that is pursuing sports psychology, I want to see that athletes are human first, performance second. I've said this so many times, and elite and developing athletes can experience mental health symptoms and disorders, and they can be unrecognized, they can be maybe stigmatized, and making help, just normalizing it, not separating that, performance from their sport. Mental health as a direct correlation with their ability to perform. Is sports sustainable performance? Coaches can notice, listen, and refer within their role. If they don't have the capabilities to give them the support that they need, let's say within they're facing some anxiety or they feel like they have having symptoms that are related to depression, they can, you know, result in asking for help, refer them to someone that might have more counseling experience. But it's about working together with your athletes, not so much putting them in a bubble and expecting them to perform and continue going through their, you know, uh, movements without understanding what makes them maybe feel not included or maybe make them feel that they aren't seen. Role clarity. And I had mentioned this earlier too. Coaches are not therapists. Coaches are trusted adults. And I mean, in certain cases, coaches can be licensed therapists, but we're not always perfect. We can't fill every single role. A mom can't be the mother and the father. You know, a point guard can't be the post player and the shooting guard and the coach and the athletic trainer. We have designated roles that we are having the best credentials to complete, and that allows you to, for coaches to notice changes in behavior. Ask simple human questions. How are you versus how are you today? Being more intentional with everything you say, everything you ask, how you frame a question. Listen without immediately fixing. Sometimes we just need to hold space for someone. Asking a student, what can I do to support you? Rather than giving them solutions to what you believe their problems are, just listen to them. Just hold space for them and just sit with them, talk with them, and try to understand where they're coming from. As I mentioned, refer to qualified professionals when risk or distress is present. Document and follow safeguarding procedures when needed. And this is so important for our youth athletes to show them that this is not something that is neglected. This isn't something that just goes past. It should be normalized. And safeguarding procedures are absolutely important when we're going about sport in any capacity at any age. Psychological safety. Mistakes should be information, not humiliation. If an athlete makes mistakes, don't publicly shame them in front of the whole team. Athletes learn faster when they ask questions, but they need to feel safe to be able to ask those questions. Fear-based coaching can create compliance, but not necessarily confidence. Meaning, athletes will listen to you, but they might not feel confident with what you're, showing them, what drills you're doing, what roles they're kind of given. And feedback should challenge behavior without attacking identity. As I'd mentioned, maybe they did something that was wrong, doesn't make them a bad person. You need to be able to differentiate those two. And respect is a daily coaching method, and this can be implemented within day to day for anyone's life, is respecting them as people before seeing them as athletes. Injury. Injury is physical, psychological, and social. The body heals on one timeline, confidence may heal on another, and athletes may grieve lost fitness, role, rhythm, and belonging on the team. And return to play should include the mind, not only the joint that's healing or the tendon that's been repaired now. Because as I'd mentioned earlier, we see a broken bone, you see a broken hand, you can see when an injury has happened, but you can't see the implications associated on the back end. As I mentioned, confidence. What if they, fear re-injuring themselves, so they limit themselves? That mental block can be seen through youth sports all the way up to Olympics. Now, an athlete not having the confidence to perform, so they limit themselves, they hold back. And sometimes it's a mental block that they don't even know is there. It's simply them being a product of their environment, and the environment didn't account for the fact that they needed to psychologically grow and be addressed to come to the strongest level. One of the components that we had addressed within my research was on an elite level, what differentiates those athletes when they've already hit peak human athletic performance. The thing that differentiates them, the sport we had looked at was ultra marathon runners, was their mind. And that's something not a lot of humans know how to train. When we feel discomfort, we stop. When we feel a little bit of uncertainty, we pull back. But when you push to that threshold, and I saw it in Suriqua Classic in Eldred, athletes pushing themselves so hard, as soon as they hit that finish line, they drop out of exhaustion. They talk about a certain area in sports psychology is called grit, and that's your ability to push through adversities. And it's unfortunately something that's still being fairly researched and it's fairly new. But the ability for an athlete to have grit, to push through a time that's not normal or easy. How do you determine that? How do you train that? It's such a new and fairly under researched area that we don't have all the answers for that. How can you know what an athlete is going to be able to do without giving the opportunity to show you, right? Hitting a flow state, hitting that ability to just go through the motions without even thinking about it, trusting the muscle memory. It truly is exceptional when you allow an athlete to express themselves in a way that shows that they are thinking, the emotional intelligence behind them, and not just the athletic performance. And for myself, I wanted to kind of touch base on this very slightly. Basketball, for example, makes the body and identity vulnerable. When you're cutting and landing, accelerating, slowing down, contact plays high demand on the knee. Injury can challenge trust in the body, and athletes may fear re-injury and lost minutes or losing their role, so they pull back. As I'd mentioned, what happens after injury? Re-injury, usually of that same joint because they don't have the proper rehabilitation and recovery. And rehab support should include confidence, communication, and identity. An athlete needs to know who they are and what they can do to improve their situation. Return to sport. So this is something that directly talks about psychological readiness and why it matters. So emotion, having anxiety, fear, frustration, or grief can influence return. Right? If you feel like I'm getting left behind, I just want to get back as soon as possible, and you're not ready yet, you're not cleared yet, what can happen? I think we're more than, you know, quick to say that you'll probably get injured again because you were not ready. You were not at optimal stage to go back to sport. Confidence Athletes need to trust in the body and the decision-making process by their professionals, and that's where the coaching staff and support comes into play. If you need to give your athletes a formal sit down and explain to them why you're making these decisions, that'll help them understand and trust the process. Risk appraisal. Athletes judge whether return feels safe or threatening. In the end, an athlete can't always have the emotional capacity to decide if they're ready or not. It has to come from a coach perspective as well as a professional for the rehabilitation support staff to some extent. And obviously, if it's youth sports, the parents to see like, are they ready? Has the team and the teammates, the family, the coaches allowed the environment that they're going to return to be safe and where they can feel safe enough to say that, you know what, right now I'm not feeling good actually, and I would want to take another 2 weeks to fully heal and develop my skills on a more psychological level. As I'd mentioned, emotional intelligence isn't addressed enough within sport from a young age. It's something that is usually developed through a certain amount of traumatic experiences and a lot of self finding and going through that journey in your own realm and allowing yourself to understand what you need. Next is identity. Athletes need to feel valued even before they are fully performing. They need to feel part of a team. They need to belong. They need to be cared for. Their ability to perform shouldn't be tied to their worth. Lastly, communication. Clear roles and expectations reduce uncertainty. If you can very clearly, as a coach, explain to an athlete that you are not expected to go to the exact level that you had left, that gives them a little assurance. Just you saying that one, line can truly allow an athlete to feel comfortable that their coach is more so worried about their health rather than their performance. It can make all the difference because when you feel cared for, you can accomplish more because you're part of a system. You're not just a block in the system that can be replaced, and when you're gone, you just get replaced by another one. You're a crucial, essential part of that system, and that system needs you to run optimally. And that, feeling of belonging, it can be exceptional within all areas of sport. Resilience is not pretending pain is not real. I talked about this also, and resilience means adapting, recovering, and continuing with support. It's not ignoring pains, hiding distress, or rushing to unsafe return. Strong athletes are the ones that can still ask for help, and strong coaches can still change the plan. What they have thought was the plan could essentially change because they need to fit the current circumstances of the team. And when you allow a coach and athlete to come together and figure out a solution rather than one telling the other, that can allow for more synergy. And as mentioned, team cohesion. When you guys work together to solve what the current situation is, it'll lead to a lot more promising results going forward. And I spoke about this as well, grit. Grit, grit, grit. Um, Grit is perseverance plus passion for long-term goals. Grit is not recklessness. Grit is sustained effort towards meaningful goals. Passion needs recovery and purpose to survive. Coaches help athletes build stamina for the long journey. And this is something that, Duckworth has defined grit as a a tool. It's a tool that can be built through consistency, not one heroic session. Grit should not be used to shame athletes into ignoring injury or mental distress. That's when it's utilized in a manner to it's weaponized essentially to put the athlete in a position to put their needs aside. They might have a little sprain in their ankle and they're like, I need to continue pushing forward because I need to prove to my coach that I can do it. And that leads to injury. And now you are essentially putting yourself in a compromised position to get hurt. And that won't allow you to continue forward because now you got an injury. Flow state. The best performance often feel fully absorbed. You have a clear goal. You have immediate feedback from your coaches. Challenge matched to skill. Deep focus with reduced self-consciousness. A sense of being in the zone. You just allow your body to do everything you practice for so many months, that muscle memory. And being in this state can be experienced by athletes as described as being fully, you know, immersed within their sport. And research reviews suggest that interest in flow performance relationships, but the relationship should not be oversimplified. And in a more practical way, coaches can create conditions that make flow more likely, allowing athletes to understand that what they're doing is directly transferable into their actual competition. Like following through a certain jump shot. If you do it enough times, but under the right circumstances and pressures, it can be implemented in a more efficient manner. If you have, let's say, students that are cheering for you and being very loud, it can put you in a completely different mindset. You might have had the muscle memory, you practiced the movement thousands and thousands of times, but just that one factor can completely throw you off. And being able to be locked in is often accounting for those X factors. You have more stress. You might have more um, kids yelling at you. Maybe someone said something that wasn't very kind, and now it's gotten into your head. Now your emotional regulation is in a different wave, and you can't hone your emotions. That can throw off your whole flow state. Coach behaviors that support flow state would include clear tasks. Athletes know exactly what success looks like in the drill, the right challenge. It's not too easy, it's not too overwhelming. It's something that just perfect. They are challenged enough to grow, but it's not too easy where they feel like they're just the best. And it's just something that happens um, because they're just simply so great. That's giving them false confidence because when they go into real sport, it's can be detrimental to their performance. Fast feedback. Feedback is very specific, brief, and usable. And you have to kind of direct this to your kids, their age group, their emotional intelligence, the level that they're able to correspond to what you're saying. Because if I am teaching the youth, let's say 13 and 14 age group basketball versus when I'm teaching, the Nairobi Thunder, it'd be completely different use of feedback. Some could be quick, fast, and understandable. And maybe for the kids, I have to explain it in a more relaxed and a more relatable way. Next one is less fear. The athlete can take risks without humiliation. Great example would be a coach puts in a student or an athlete into the game and they take a shot, they miss, they take them out right away. They're gonna fear taking a shot from that going point because they know exactly what happens after. You need to give an athlete the room to grow because if you constrict them into a certain bubble, they won't be able to push forward in a healthy setting. They're going to have that fear of getting taken off of the game rather than being able to just go into that flow state and just allowing yourself to just practice what you've played and putting it into action and rhythm. As I mentioned, practice has tempo, focus, and purpose. It shouldn't just be free for all the time. It needs to have intention, it needs to have direction. And without direction, you're simply just, losing the momentum. Presence. Athletes focus on action, not judgment. OVEP in action. So friendship. Belonging without losing standards. Friendships means connection, solidarity, and shared humanity. Teams can compete hard and still build respectful bonds. At the end of a basketball game, you leave everything on the court, is what we say. Nothing falls outside the court. You don't have grudges. You don't have negative emotions associated with the game. You leave all your emotions, the whole basketball game should stay on the court. You can learn from it, of course, but you shouldn't be holding. You didn't pass me the ball. You didn't set me a screen. You didn't rebound. So I don't like you anymore. That's going to lead to a lot of instability within a team, a coach, even potentially leagues. They can have grudges. This team is a dirty players. We don't like them. Rather build connection. And connection is not weakness. It's a foundation for trust. And when teams and teammates, coaching staff, the support staff, rehabilitation staff, they all support each other and there's a certain level of connection, it can allow for growth and development on a long-term sustainable effort. Respect. Dignity is a part of development. Respect the athlete's body, respect the athlete's voice, allow them to express themselves, allow them to voice their opinions. If they feel like what the coach is saying isn't right. So, from my experience, even I've been in certain situations where the athletes have challenged me and I took it to heart. I took it as a personal, insult that they're targeting and they attacked what I know and my experience and my judgment versus they might not understand. They might not understand what has been taught onto what level, and explaining that can go the whole distance. That allows to build that connection. Respect the culture, respect your opponents, the officials, background, lived experience, and respect long-term well-being over short-term ego. That's probably a very, very important aspect of respect because what you show an athlete in a game can directly influence how they might be performed in the, let's say, career of their athletics journey. If you treat them with a certain level of care, even when they didn't perform, they will hold that emotion. They'll remember that. They remember how they, like I said, they'll remember not the drill, they remember the feeling associated with what they had felt, the community aspect. Excellence, becoming your best without losing yourself. Excellence, growth, effort, and quality. It's not perfectionism. We're humans. That's not something that we can ever really strive towards. It is not sacrificing health for image. The strongest version of excellence includes character, skill, and well-being. Know that we are people outside our sport. As I mentioned, we need to have overall stability within all areas and aspects of our lives. Now, this is a little bit of a toolkit that I had thought of here. 5 practices coaches can use tomorrow for their sport. Ask first. Start check-ins with how are you really doing? And to make it more intentional, how are you really doing today? Because a lot of individuals, I mean, for me personally, even someone asks me, how are you doing? I'll say, I'm doing okay. Because that's what we've been conditioned to respond with, that we're all right, we're okay, rather than asking, how are you doing today? I'm really exhausted today. I'm very, very fatigued. I didn't have the best breakfast. I didn't have a very good, test. Now the coaches have a certain level of understanding with, okay, this athlete is not feeling their 100%. Now I'm going to treat them with compassion and empathy and give them some space. Explain why. Connect drills and demands to purpose. Why are we doing what we're doing? How can it directly relate into the competition? If we're going through a certain drill, how will it actually relate to when we play? Praise process. Reinforce effort, learning and recovery, and courage. Keeping identity wide. Ask about school, family, interests, and future goals and aspirations. Learn about the person, not just the athlete that you see. Who are they? How is their academics? How is their personal life? How is their family? Those things usually get neglected to some extent with a lot of sports. And what you've seen is what people want to and need to see. That's the performance. Refer when needed. Not all of us will be the best for every job. If I need a specialist for physiotherapy, I can have a little bit of experience. I have had, my own qualifications, but that doesn't mean I'm the best man for the job. And I need to refer when needed, using qualified support for mental health or medical concerns when applicable. For an athlete, 5 practices that these athletes can use tomorrow is name role. List who you are beyond sport. Start thinking about, what makes me me. Process goals. Track actions, not only outcomes. Speak early. And this can be directly aligned with your coaches if you build a space that athletes can feel comfortable and safe with speaking in. They will talk about it before it becomes some sort of crisis, right? Before it gets so stressful and overwhelming. Giving them the space and support system before it gets too out of control. Recover fully. Understand that your sleep, your rest, rehabilitation, your diet, your personal coping mechanisms are all dependent on you. You are in charge of yourself. And that's the autonomy factor that I spoke about earlier. And protect joy. Keep one part of the sport that feels playful and meaningful. Why did you start? Why did you start playing basketball? Was it because you knew that it was going to bring you accolades? Or was it because you genuinely had fun shooting a ball through a hoop? Remember why you started, because that's what got your foot through the door. 5 system level supports. Now, this is from more of an administration side, and this is referral pathways. Make mental health and medical support easy to access for anyone. It shouldn't be pushed and forced rather than presented as an educational aspect for the coaches, the athletes, the parents, for everyone. Coach education. Train coaches in communication, development, and safeguarding. They are in charge of the athletes and they need to present themselves in a fashion that protects them. Recovery culture. Monitor load. How much are they training? Are they training 3 times a day? Are they training once a day? Are they training, you know, too much that they can't recover enough? They might have travel, competition, and rest and recovery. All these factors directly align with recovery. I can overtrain and I can under recover, and that's going to be detrimental and negatively impactful for my performance. This is more so for earlier youth athletes, is dual career support. Support school, work, and future planning. Understand from a perspective of uh, parents or coaching staff that You shouldn't only push one sport because you feel like that's what you want your kid to excel in. It should be giving the option to perform in multiple even and allow them to choose rather than being pushed down a certain path and that's the only option they have. And lastly, value alignment. Turn the Olympic value educational program values into policies and daily behaviors. Allow kids to understand what it actually means for their values to be aligned. Now, closing reflection, bringing it back to the person. I want you guys to kind of take this one question with you is what is one thing you can do this week to help an athlete or even a person feel seen beyond the performance? And, I know this seminar is directly related with sports, but you can look at anybody from any capacity. Performance just means your ability to do what you are trained to do. You can be trained to be a data analyst, you can be trained to be a dentist, a police officer. What is one thing you can do this week to help a person feel seen beyond what their job is or their title is? And key takeaways. The best sport systems develop people who can thrive after the final whistle. Train the person first, build identity wider than sport, protect passion from burnout, support mental health without the stigma behind it, normalizing these conversations as we're having right now, and using Olympic values as daily coaching behavior. And these are just my references, and I just wanted to open up the board for any questions or concerns about anything that was covered today.
Uh, Thank you, Mr. Talvey. That was such a great and insightful presentation. I believe personally I've learned a lot, and this is something that I would wish to get more and more conversation with you in terms of coach and athlete, the burnout issues, especially the question that you asked in terms of why would somebody keep on coming back even if they're losing.
Right.
That is very key. And as you mentioned, the definition that we've always associated with burnout is just the
Mhm.
physical burnout, which is not the case. So I'm just saying those are some of the issues or some of the ideas or the learning points that you've shared, which I find to be very, very critical and very, very empowering to have as a coach who deals with many athletes. So that was just a comment. So if, as you've asked, if there's anyone with a question, they can raise it. There's one on the chat box.
Okay,
Can I read it? Oh,
yeah, you can read it. Yeah, go for it.
let me read it for you. Let's see. What's the best way to deal with quitting athletes? Is it appropriate removing them from WhatsApp groups, for example?
So this is an interesting one, and even myself, I've had the privilege of having certain circumstances that have allowed me some experience in this case, and I've seen it on a youth coaching perspective as well as university levels where they've had a lot of issues with um, just the team cohesion. Like people weren't getting along, they didn't feel that they were inviting. And when an athlete quits, I believe it's very important to understand that no matter which decision they had made to whether leave the team or not, respect and that empathy empathy and the empathetic perspective that I'd mentioned earlier is treat them with respect. They're still humans. Just because they're no longer playing with you doesn't mean that they're bad people and they're quitting on you. They simply are choosing themselves. They're simply deciding that my best path forward might not align with the team. And leaving on good terms. It's so hard. Even when someone quits a job, they feel like this person quit on me. And don't take it personally. Take it as this individual is choosing a different path, and it's not about me, it's about them. Giving them the power, giving them the control over their decision. And a lot of even teams, sometimes the teammates might take personal offense to it as well, but explaining to them that this athlete has made a decision that's best for them, and we will respect it and honor that decision, regardless of what they had done prior. And in terms of removing them from like a WhatsApp group, for example, you had mentioned, um, having a certain amount of communication that surrounds like what it looks like going forward before just deleting them off the WhatsApp group. Explain to your team, you know, so and so has decided that their best path forward is not aligning with our team's values, and we now will have to obviously, remove them from the chat, but explaining why, rather than allowing for drama and other conversations to unfold, explaining that this is just happening and everything's on good terms, to the best that you can control, obviously, and treating them with respect. I think that's the most adult and mature way to go about it. Patrick, you're welcome. I can share the notes. I can share it with John, and he can directly uh, send it out. I'm not sure how it works per se, but we can arrange for anybody that would want or is interested within any of the notes that were spoken about today. They can have access to those.
Yeah, we'll share the notes. Once we edit the video, we'll have everything saved in the website so you can access the video and the notes as well.
Okay. I think we have one more question here. What's my take on paid sports? What should be the balance between training athletes who sometimes cannot pay the coaches? Okay. Paid sports, I think that should be treated as a job. And just like any job, there's certain expectations associated with that role. And the second question was what should be the balance between training athletes who sometimes cannot pay the coaches? It's investing. If you are investing into an athlete or even into a coach, it's that relationship that needs to be understood. Because if you can't pay the coaches right now, the coaches are investing in you and you're investing time into the coaches. You believe that they have potential to succeed. We all start somewhere. We're not all born successful. We create that. We create that space and that pathway for us. And I believe that needs to be addressed early on of what the expectations are for each other, the coaching and the athletes, and to see what is the path moving forward. Because obviously, if you are committing your time, your resources to someone, you need to be, to some extent, uh, given some recognition. And yeah, that needs to be addressed early on. I'd say open dialogue, open communication of what the expectations are for each other, and moving forward when things are going the way that you both had planned. What is the next step? Are you guys gonna get uh, some type of money or whatever you guys discuss between those two parties? Um, yes, Agnes. I think there's a question that you're raising your hand.
Thank you so much. Mine is just to say thank you. I've learned a lot from you. That if you want your players, or if you want the athletes to be part of you, you must have friendship, belonging without losing standard. The friendship connections between the athlete and the coach can improve the performance of the coach, performance of the athlete. Then I have learned a lot from you that respect, dignity is part of development. Respect the athlete's body. Be it is the player is fat, the player is thin, short. You should respect the player's body, respect the athlete's voice, because we are made differently or we are born differently. Maybe one has the louder voice, the other one has the. So I've learned as a coach that I should respect the athlete's voice, then listen to her or listen to him, whatever that he's saying, so that I cannot. As a coach, I develop the players, the player. I develop the player talent. Then I've learned a lot from you that respect opponent and officials. There are some other people who doesn't respect the opponents. They think that when they are with the opponents, playing with the opponents, they are their enemies.
Yes.
I've learned that the opponent is also a friend, and you should respect the opponent. Then the officials who are around the place. Some of them think that the referees or the other coaches for the opponent team are enemies. But I've learned from you that you should respect them. Then we should respect the culture and the background of the player. Some of them think that you can get a player, maybe is an Islamic, using his the dress or covering her body, especially ladies. They don't respect. Some of them shout that, how are they putting on? You are not putting on the right attire. You are not. But I've learned a lot from you. And then I've learned a lot from this course.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Agnes. I think it's very important to recognize differences, right? But
Yeah,
differences,
yeah.
it shouldn't divide us, it should bring us together.
Then maybe I can say that I came late. How can I get these notes at least or for me also to teach other coaches so
For
that
sure.
they can handle well their athletes?
Yeah, I can share this with John, like my
Okay.
notes. I don't per se have like an official uh like lesson plan planned out for
Mm,
coaches, distributed or anything like
yes.
that. But that can be developed if there's enough need for it. So that can be something on the itinerary going forward. Was there any other questions or comments, feedback? I want to hear from everybody else. No, I think that's a wrap.
Yeah, if there's no any more questions, again, let me take this opportunity to thank you again for availing yourself and sharing that quite immense knowledge. I believe all who are in this call have really learned and have enjoyed the presentation. And I can only ask you to, I can see a hand is raised. We will give our an opportunity. I can only ask you again when you find or when you get an opportunity, always be, you are always free or we are always available to, to learn from you. That was
Thank you.
such insightful and wonderful.
As I
Oh,
learn more, I will
Agnes.
pass along the message to you guys.
Mine is to thank Sir John. Some of us, like the coaches, can I say the beginners coaches or we did not know that we can have such a sessions. when we got this WhatsApp, we were thinking, what is it for? But I've really learned a lot. I've really learned a lot from this course, and I pray that we shall continue, because some of us, the coaches, the psychological part, we don't know. We can just take it as is that because I'm a coach, I'm a head of coach, or I'm what, I can do anything. But I'm really thanking Sir John for giving us this session of special this. For this WhatsApp and for this session to us, the coaches. Thank you so much, Sir John, for this,
You're
and
welcome.
continue enlightening us with these important sessions.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Any other person? Any other comment before we bring this down? If none, thank you so much for creating time to, join this call, and just have to wish you a good night and see you next time. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to give some